Sunjay Kumar. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, been in Chicago for the last 6 years or so. So for me, coming out, it always depends on what situation, what community you're in when you're doing it. Probably the first coming out I had, it's always to yourself first, but I think it was part of I spent a lot of time online in kind of role-playing forums and various sorts of just story writing, kind of literary things. And a lot of the friends I met there, they were kind of the first people that I communicated with, and was able to talk about my sexuality and my feelings, and the vocabulary I got was from slash fan fiction and all sorts of just kind of internet things. I didn't come out to my family or to my parents until I was already dating someone. It was kind of I wanted to make sure that I wanted to share my relationship with them, and so part of that was coming out. And part of me was naively thinking, I justified to myself, right, that I thought, oh, well, it's not a big deal. I live in a liberal town. But then when I actually came to talk to them about it, I was really nervous and barely managed to get out I said something I think I actually like both boys and girls or something like that. Back before I wouldn't phrase my sexuality that way now, but that was how I did it then. And their reaction was neither as bad nor as good as I had hoped. There was the first thing that I remember from their conversation was they were like, oh, well, we're not surprised because your brother came out 4 years ago or whatever, and it wasn't, and so that's we're not surprised at all to see that you are as well. And that had been a shock to me because I had no idea. My brother hadn't come out to me. I think my parents had kind of a idea that sexuality was something that was secret, that you didn't really talk about it, or I guess private. And that had meant that being able to talk about that was not something that was part of what we did. So there is that. My parents also, they made very clear that I was loved, which is great. But they also they offered me saying, oh, well, if you want someone to talk to about this, to go through it, we can get therapy or something. And my brain went immediately to conversion therapy and reparative therapy, which is not what they were talking about at all. But I think that goes to show just how much internalized fear and shame there was in how society talked about things. And also I had grown up in a Southern Baptist church, so I didn't know for sure how my parents would react. They also encouraged me to not share, to keep it private. And I think I more or less went along with it for the rest of high school. But when I moved away for college, I came up to Chicago. And when I got to college, I was much more open. One of the first communities that I got involved with was a queer community. And so then in college I had the complete opposite sort of everyone knew I was out because I was part of this organization, and that was a big part of my identity. So then it was easier in a lot of ways, and then I could still not think about it as much. But that did have an interesting thing where when I would go home and I would talk to my friends from home, some of them figured out because they saw on Facebook I changed my statuses and stuff. I didn't have any long-term relationships that got to Facebook official level, but I was vocal about things, so people figured it out. But then I had other friends who I thought of as being relatively close friends growing up that just I never told them because I was in such a different place in high school, and then they found out 4 years later, and they were like, "Why didn't you tell me? This is an important part of your life." So that was So I think that kind of reminded me that coming out is always it's never just you do it once and it's done. And I had to do it over and over again, even if it got easier as time went on, and even after most of my community was aware of it. Definitely start by talking to friends and maybe people who you already kind of know are sympathetic. And I think having that community behind you can help you have like the strength to be able to have the more difficult conversations with people in your life who maybe won't be as automatically sympathetic, and will be able to help you like get through the kind of difficult conversations if they come up. I think it's important to remember that like it won't necessarily always be perfect, and not everything will come easily, but I think it's, well, I don't want to say for everyone it's worth it, but I think a lot of times it's worth it, and you'll be surprised by the support that you'll get. But also, like, I would definitely encourage you to do what it takes to keep yourself safe if you're worried that coming out will put you at risk for like not having a home or not having access to like basic resources. There's also no shame in like waiting until you're in a part of life where you're more independent. We're seeing a big uptick in racism and homophobia and transphobia. That's all kind of coming up with kind of this right-wing backlash. You know, Donald Trump was elected president, and that was accompanied, there's been an uptick in hate crimes and everything. I think overall that's the biggest challenge. It manifests itself kind of differently depending on who you are and where you are in life. And I think the important thing that we need to keep in mind is how we can come together and show solidarity with each other and like support each other, even if we have very different experiences. Like, I think my experience growing up in a suburb, going to a relatively conservative church, but also in a place that didn't have a lot of like police brutality and didn't have a lot of like, there wasn't a lot of like racially motivated violence. That'll put you in a very, like that was a very different experience than someone who maybe grew up in a place that's more like progressive on a lot of things, but then also, you know, has a lot of communities being like heavily policed and criminalized and incarcerated. So I think coming together and being able to like both acknowledge that like different people in the community have struggles, but also that our struggles are connected, because like we cannot find like liberation and safety by ourselves as like individual groups, but only all together. My favorite part about being me, I mean, I like learning things. I like reading books and finding out more information and talking to people and like making and like thinking more deeply. I think just knowing that there's always something more to learn, and knowing that even if I may not always have the like all the answers, there's still like a place to go from there. I think that's my favorite thing, and I don't know, maybe that's my favorite thing about being human, maybe not just being me.